The wind came first, low and mean, sliding across the prairie like a blade drawn slow from a sheath. It rattled the barbed wire and made the posts complain, a long, thin whine that Elias Crow felt in his teeth before he heard it. He planted his boots in the dirt and leaned his shoulder into the fence line, testing it, feeling how the whole thing answered him. Too much give, not enough spine. The cattle beyond the gate shifted and murmured, dark backs rolling like a restless tide. The sky had that wrong color to it, greenish and bruised, the kind that put a knot in a rancher's gut because it meant time was already spent. The iron lever stuck out from the gate at a bad angle, rusted to the color of old blood. It wasn't supposed to be there like that. It was meant to lie flat, to slide easy, to do its job and be done. But storms and neglect and the slow, grinding patience of years had twisted it into a problem. Elias wrapped his fingers around it and felt the roughness bite. The metal was cold despite the heat, a cold that felt stubborn. "Please, don't pull it," old Tom Keeler said behind him. Tom's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It always did. He'd learned how to speak so the wind would listen. He stood with his hat crushed between his hands, eyes flicking from the lever to the cattle to the sky, counting costs the way men do when they've lost before. "That lever's holding the brace. You pull it, the whole line goes." "I seen it." Elias didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the fence, on the way the wire sagged between posts like a tired back. He could smell rain already, sharp and clean, riding the wind. He could hear thunder far off, not loud yet, but steady, like a drum being tuned. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and left a smear of rust there. "It's not a brace anymore," he said, mostly to himself. He gave the lever a small test, just enough to feel the answer. The gate shuddered. The wire sang. Flakes of rust fell and dust puffed at his boots. "It's a hinge that forgot what it was for." Tom took a step closer, then thought better of it. "Elias," he said, and there was a history in that one word. Years of fences set and mended, of nights spent riding drag, of losses taken quiet because there was work to do the next morning. "Storm's coming hard. We can cut the herd loose. Let 'em run. Fix it after." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. In the dark behind his lids he saw his father's hands, scarred and sure, measuring distance with a look and a spit. He heard his voice saying, "Don't fight the land, boy. Learn where it bends." Elias opened his eyes and looked at the fence again, really looked, seeing past the rust and the bad angle to the bones of it. The lever was a lie now. It pretended to hold while it waited to fail at the worst possible time. "Fence is already dead," Elias said. He shifted his grip, set his feet wider. "We're just deciding how it dies." Thunder cracked closer, sharp enough to make the cattle bawl. A few pressed toward the gate, hooves churning the dirt into a powder that lifted and stuck to sweat. Elias felt the fence answer that pressure, a trembling that traveled up the post into his shoulder. He breathed out slow and pulled. The lever fought him like something alive. It bit his palms, scraping skin, sending a sting up his arms. The iron groaned, a sound like a throat clearing before a shout. Elias leaned his weight into it, muscles burning, teeth set. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to that one point of resistance, to the feel of metal refusing and then, just a little, giving. "Elias!" Tom's shout was cut by the wind. With a sound like a gunshot, the lever tore free. The suddenness of it sent Elias stumbling back a half step. The post buckled. Wire snapped and screamed, a high, tearing sound that made the cattle surge. The gate sagged inward, wounded, its hinges protesting as boards split. Elias didn't stop to watch it fail. He lunged forward and grabbed the falling gate with both hands, fingers slipping on wet wood as the first fat drops of rain hit. He ripped. It wasn't clean. Nothing ever was. Hinges tore out with a splintering crack. Boards split along old grain lines that had waited years for this moment. Elias felt the shock run through his shoulders and into his spine, a jolt that stole his breath. He tore again, teeth bared, rain stinging his face now in earnest. The gate came apart in his hands, pieces falling into the mud. Behind him, Tom was moving, shouting, waving his hat, trying to turn the cattle's fear into motion that wouldn't crush itself. "Keep 'em back," he yelled to no one and everyone. "Keep 'em back." Lightning flashed, white and sudden, freezing the scene in a hard-edged picture. Elias standing in the break, rain slicking his hair to his skull, hands bleeding rust and splinters, the cattle bunched and wide-eyed, Tom a dark shape against the sky, arm raised. Then the world came back with a roar of thunder and the heavy drumming of rain. Elias dragged the last of the gate clear and threw it aside. He could feel the fence line trembling under the pressure of the herd, the wire vibrating like a plucked string. He shoved a fallen board out of the way with his boot and planted himself square in the opening, arms out, body making a shape that said stop even if his mouth did not. The cattle surged and checked, their fear a hot thing in the air. Easy, Elias said, voice low and steady, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear it. He took a step forward, then another, pushing into the pressure instead of yielding to it. The rain soaked him through, plastering his shirt to his back, turning dust to mud that sucked at his boots. He felt a horn brush his sleeve and held his ground. The fence behind him gave another inch and then settled, as if accepting its fate. Elias spared it a glance and felt a strange calm settle in his chest. The decision had been made. There was no going back to before. Tom reached the line and grabbed a post, bracing it with his shoulder. "You're mad," he yelled, rain streaming off his hat brim. "Mad as a cut snake." "Maybe," Elias said, and almost smiled. Thunder rolled overhead, longer now, the storm fully upon them. The cattle bawled and stamped, but the break was clear, wide enough now that there would be no choke if they moved through it instead of against it. Elias could feel the land beyond the fence, the way it sloped and opened, the promise of space. He turned slightly, angling his body, beginning to shape the chaos into something that could be guided. Another flash of lightning lit the prairie, and in that brief, harsh light Elias saw it plain. The old fence had done its work for as long as it could. Holding onto it now would only break things worse. Letting go, tearing it apart on his own terms, was the only way to save what mattered. The rain came down harder, a curtain that blurred edges and softened sounds. Elias stood in it, heart hammering, hands raw, ready to do whatever came next. Night fell the way it does on the plains when a storm decides it owns the sky, sudden, complete, swallowing detail and leaving only sound and motion. Rain hammered down in thick sheets, turning the ground slick and treacherous, and the wind shoved at everything standing as if offended by resistance. Elias wiped water from his eyes with the back of his forearm and took in the damage in quick, practical glances. The fence lay torn open, wire slack and whining under strain, posts leaning at wrong angles like broken teeth. The cattle pressed and shifted, fear running through them in ripples that threatened to become a wave. Tom splashed up beside him, breath coming hard. "They won't hold," he shouted over the thunder. "Not like this." Elias nodded. He already knew. The sensible move, the one every rancher learned young, was to open everything and let the herd scatter, to trust the land to slow them and the daylight to gather them again. Fences could be rebuilt, cattle could be found, men, crushed under panicked weight, could not be replaced so easily. That was the rule. Elias broke it. He turned and ran for the corral gate, boots slipping in the mud, rain plastering his clothes to his skin. Tom shouted something behind him, a question or a curse, but Elias didn't slow. He reached the gate and threw his weight into it, fingers numb as he fumbled the latch. For a moment it stuck, swollen wood refusing to cooperate, and then it gave. The gate swung wide with a groan. Tom stared at him through the rain, eyes wide. "What in God's name are you doing?" Elias didn't answer. He stepped into the open space between corral and pasture, into the dark mass of bodies and breath and fear. He raised his arms, palms out, not to stop but to signal, to make himself something the cattle could read. Lightning flashed, bleaching the world white, and for an instant Elias saw the herd's eyes reflect it, dozens of bright points, wild and uncertain. He began to sing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't pretty, it was a low, steady murmur that sat under the storm instead of fighting it, a tune without words that his mother used to hum when calves bawled in the night and nothing else would settle them. Elias didn't think about the notes. He let the rhythm find him, let it set his breathing. He walked backward, slow and deliberate, boots sliding, arms wide enough to guide but not block. The cattle hesitated. One stepped forward, then another. The pressure shifted, no longer a shove but a flow. Elias kept singing, kept moving, shaping the chaos with his body and his voice. He felt horns brush past his sleeves, warm flanks bump his elbows, the heavy, living weight of the herd responding to something older than fear. Rain ran down his face and into his mouth, tasting of iron and dust. Thunder cracked overhead, so close it felt like it split his skull, and for a terrible heartbeat the cattle surged. Elias planted his feet and held, voice steady even as his heart hammered. He thought of his father again, of the way he'd stand quiet in the middle of trouble, making it look easy. Don't fight the land, learn where it bends. Lightning tore the sky open, a jagged white scar, and the world froze. Elias saw himself reflected in it. Hat gone, hair slicked down, clothes torn and dark, arms spread like some foolish preacher calling to a congregation that didn't know his language. Then the light vanished, and the rain and darkness rushed back in. He kept walking. Behind him, Tom found his legs. He ran along the edge of the moving herd, shouting, waving, adding his presence to Elias's shape. Together they turned the break in the fence from a wound into a door. The cattle flowed through it and out into the open pasture, where the land dipped and the grass held, where there was room to spread and settle instead of piling up in terror. Minutes stretched and blurred. Elias lost track of time, of how long he sang, of how many times his boots nearly slid out from under him. His arms ached, his throat burned, but the pressure eased, the bawling softened, the movement slowed from a rush to a drift. The herd spread out, dark shapes dissolving into the rain, heads lowering to grass even as the storm raged. When it was done, when there was nothing left pressing past him, Elias let his arms fall. He stood there, chest heaving, rain soaking him to the bone. Tom came, up beside him, both of them breathing hard, both of them silent. For a long moment they just listened. The storm was still loud, but the note of panic was gone. The cattle moved and chewed and snorted, ordinary sounds returning like a promise. "You could have been killed," Tom said finally, voice rough. Elias nodded. "Could have," he said. He didn't try to justify it. There was no explaining a choice like that in the moment it was made. They worked through the rest of the night in the rain, doing what could be done. They drove stakes where the ground would take them, tied wire off to trees, marked the worst breaks for daylight. Elias's hands shook with fatigue, his palms raw and bleeding, but he kept moving. When the storm finally began to weaken, the thunder rolling farther off, the rain easing to a steady whisper, the sky lightened from black to a tired gray. Dawn came slow and pale, washing the world clean. Steam rose from the earth, and the pasture glowed green and silver. The fence lay ruined in places, the gate a pile of splintered wood and twisted iron, but the cattle grazed calm and whole, spread out the way cattle should be. Tom stood beside Elias at the edge of the break, boots sunk in mud, hat back on his head now. He looked at the damage, then at the herd, then back at Elias. "You tore it apart," he said. "Everything your pa built." Elias followed his gaze. He felt the weight of it then. The years of work, the careful lines laid down by hands no longer here. He also felt something else, quieter but steadier. He nodded once. "So it wouldn't tear us apart instead," he said. Tom snorted, a short, almost laugh. "You always were stubborn. Learned from the best." They stood there as the light grew stronger, already talking through the rebuild without quite saying it. Where to set new posts, how to run the line so it bent with the land instead of fighting it. Elias turned toward the ranch house at last, shoulders aching, boots heavy with mud, knowing the work ahead would be hard and long. But as he walked, he felt certain of one thing. Sometimes the unthinkable was just another word for necessary.